joining us today as we discuss the topic of how to support a loved one in grief. And joining me for this discussion is Dr. Alan Wolfelt, a man whose work has fundamentally reshaped how we understand and honor the journey of loss. Dr. Wolfelt is a world-renowned author, educator, grief counselor, and founder for the Center for Loss and Life Transition. He's also been an incredible mentor for all of us at EricsHouse, having trained and certified each of our grief companions. It's my privilege to welcome you, Dr. Alan Wolfelt.
Thank you, Matthew. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you today. Thanks for inviting me into the dialogue.
Absolutely. It's my privilege. And, I asked you to join this conversation because the subject of how to support a friend or loved one in grief can be really complex and confusing for both the mourner and the companion. And, this is especially true with stigmatized losses that we support at EricsHouse, such as suicide or substance use, where there are many additional layers of stigma attached. There are already so many misconceptions about grief that have made healthy and authentic mourning appear to be erratic or out of control to somebody who doesn't understand or has not experienced this personally. And that can make it hard for an observer to react to. Now, in my personal experience as both a mourner and a companion, I think that lack of understanding is really anchored in how modern society treats grief on whole, where, you have always talked about the fact that the clinical model treats grief as a problem to be solved. And we treat it as part of the human condition. And, could you describe a little bit for us about, to our audience about what, the differences between the companioning approach and the clinical approach are, and how, it's more helpful to show up in that manner for someone who's in pain?
I'd be more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
As I do that, I'd reflect on my own insights in my educational experience. I went to university for 13 years of training, and they taught me to assess, diagnose, and treat. But I discovered such a contrast between that and what I felt was truly helpful when I was out doing home visits. I started at age 19 to visit people after a death. So I'd go in, Matthew, to the academic classroom, and we're talking about at that time, to show my age, the DSM-3 within the mental health Bible, if you will. Mm-hmm. And we're learning tools and techniques to treat away hurt, pain, and suffering. When in fact, I found that if I could be present to people, to hold space for them, to create what Henry Nouwen years ago called hospitality, shared space where a stranger became a friend, and to discover in my experience that was really them teaching me instead of the other way around. Or another way I might say it is, instead of me feeling a need to fix or cure, it was really about opening my heart, knowing they were in liminal space, betwixt and between. They're suspended between their past and their future. And that if I could create a hospitable, holding environment where they could disengage from, I guess, what I'd call their normal demands of living, that their grief could then become active, authentic mourning. Whereas if, in contrast, we're thinking, I've got to do something to get them somewhere they're not. Because there's a helping premise that's a centerpiece of a companion model that says, enter into what someone thinks and feels without attempting to think your job is to change what they think and feel. That's a centerpiece from which my 11 tenets are really built. And then I guess the other layer of that is just to come back and remember who the true expert is. It's the mourner, and that my job isn't to take away their hurt, their pain and suffering. It's through befriending that change and movement occurs, and that we never arrive. So I think, as you know, coming through my trainings, one of my mantras is not attached to outcome. I'm not trying to move you where you're not. I'm trying to bring non-judgment, compassion, empathy, immediacy to that holding environment where you feel safe. Because another discovery I made early on in my own caregiving life was, if you don't feel safe, you keep your grief internalized. That doesn't convert to authentic mourning, a distinction if you like, we can remind our viewers about that important distinction. But if you can be hospitable, you can understand the concept of sanctuary, meaning that people disengage from normal demands, and you can take the 11 tenets of a companioning model, entered into a teach me experience, then you release yourself from the thought, I've got to get somebody where they're not. And then the movement, in fact, occurs. It's kind of an ultimate interesting experience that the more I accept you are where you are, the more we create what that fancy word I teach, you don't even have to remember the formal term, but it's called perturbation. It means if I'm accepted and I'm not judged for having the thoughts and the feelings and experiences when I'm torn apart, bereavement, to be torn apart, to have unique needs, now I feel free with you to share my heart and soul with you in a way that allows me to do soul work on the pathway to spirit work. And those words relate to how when we have a loss, there's downward movement of our psyche naturally. We historically, before we became so mourning avoidant, and we had ways of identifying who was bereaved, even strangers would approach you and they would invite you into your soul work. I'm sorry, I see you've had a death. Who died? You'd all day long retell your love story. And that's how you eventually came to spirit work, which was upward movement toward light, knowing you still never arrived. Because a companion model, also a distinction, is that we transform. We don't resolve. We don't get over. Transformation means an entire change in form. You were changed forever by the death of your precious Jacob, right? You're not,
yes, sir.
Never will be. Anyway, long response to your lovely question.
But, the concept of sitting in silence with the mourner versus advice giving or kind of nudging people forward is so much more powerful. And it will resonate with, at least for myself and many people that I've talked to, it resonates with the mourner so much more deeply. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would reflect on what you've just beautifully spoken to, and that is people are well-intended, they're just misinformed. So we don't want to project blame. We want to have grace. We want to know that, but very naturally in a mourning avoidant culture, I often say, and I know you've heard me speak to this, you can split people around you often in thirds, that a third of people are neutral. They don't hurt you or help you when you're in grief. A third of people you're around, and again, we want to have grace with them. Well, you'll actually feel worse after you're around them because the theme is they're trying to take your you. But thank goodness for people who often through their own trials and tribulations and losses have come to understand and aspire at least to be in the helpful third, knowing that even when you get there, you're going to put your foot in your mouth sometimes, right? So I love how, while you were reflecting, it's a reminder to be gentle with those people in our lives that aren't grief informed. It's not their fault. They've grown up in a mourning avoidant culture. Carry on, keep your chin up, keep busy. God wouldn't give anything more than you can bear. Do you have other children? All the things that are classic cliches that are well intended, but they ultimately end up moving the mourner away from grief instead of toward it. And yet we know the only way to the other side is through. So that's some reflection on that. And then your comment about bearing witness, sitting in sacred silence. Some of the most profound times in my almost now, amazingly enough, giving away my age, 50 years of walking with thousands of people in grief, some of the most profound times, I think, I hope, I pray, come for the mourner when I can sit with them in silence and in stillness. And then out of their heart, their well of reception, can come the grief converting into mourning, the response to loss outside of self, to remind our viewers that they can get there if I don't get in their way. And I love the concept of phenomenology. Fancy word means your reality is your reality. So if you need to do if only work, or you're mad because of this death, that's where we go. You'll teach me where you need to give attention. And then I need to honor that, not try to move you away from it or tell you being upset isn't going to change anything, or quit asking yourself if only work, which is so human that we go backward before forward and say, is there anything I might have done different to change an outcome? How instinctive and human is that?
Why I was so excited to have this conversation with you. You and I have had so many sidebar conversations outside of class on this exact thing and my own personal experience here. And, again, it gets back to, you talk about the rule of thirds and the people that show up in your life, in sometimes harmful ways. And, what is kind of missed is that often those are the people that love you the most, that just want to see you restored, premature of you doing your grief work, your hello work, as you said, going backward before forward. In the days or weeks following, I may have been all over the place in what I needed. I could have been sending a lot of mixed signals, and that could create an environment where people want to try and guide you because you're a little bit all over, especially those who love you, deeply.
You're in
And
chaos. All change starts with chaos. And they
yes,
see that and they go, that's not the normal Matthew I know. I want the old one back, right?
right.
They're
So
well,
they may try to take you where they think you should go or what worked for them.
maybe it's helpful to remember we live in the world's first death-free generation, and some of the people we're surrounded by, they can be 40 or 50, their parents are alive, maybe even some of their grandparents. So again, we want to be grace-filled because they know not what they do. As you said, and we've repeated, they're well-intended, but they're misinformed. So when that's the case, to use the art, I think it's an art of supportive confrontation where people don't feel assaulted when you point that out. That's why I say supportive confrontation. I use it all the time, and nobody says, would you quit confronting me? Because they don't even know I'm confronting them, because you're doing it with a loving heart. What is your motivation to do it? It's to be able to keep your voice about the need to be authentic with your mourning, and it's also to be able to keep that relationship intact in a way that doesn't just have you want to go to exile and not be around them, because these are people you love and they love you and care about you. So what are ways that we can supportively confront? If I could just share with your viewers the importance of always prefacing any kind of supportive, gentle confrontation with, I know when you say that,
Mhm.
you're trying to be helpful. And a personal example I always like to give, my mother and father were married 50 years. And in the weeks following my dad's death, every person who saw my mother said, you made it 50 years. You know, a lot of people don't. True, but not helpful. So she asked me, what do? I say, Mom, they're well intended. You look them in the eye. You say, I know when you say that, you're trying to be helpful. Do you mind if I share with you why I don't find it real helpful? And then she'd go on to talk about, I was 12 when I met Don. He was 13, a much older man. She could tell her love story to them. And as she did that, she's taking her grief from inside to outside.
Right.
But also she's prefacing it by saying, I know when you say that, you're trying to be helpful. And then the key is ask permission to teach them. Do you mind if I share with you why right now I don't always find that helpful? And that's my problem with the medical model, is all too often the tools and techniques are about getting somebody where they're not instead of holding space for where they are. And that's what EricsHouse has come to do beautifully for so many people they serve, is you can be authentic with your grief. Did you not find that when you discovered EricsHouse, that you finally found a place that allowed you to be where you were in the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember my first conversation with Greg, our co-founder, about 4 months after Jacob died. And, to that point, we've kind of shifted away from, a lot of the people showing up with casseroles or lasagna, sending cards. A little bit of time had passed and people have kind of migrated back to their lives. And I felt a little bit more isolated at that point in time. And at that point, people were less likely to bring the conversation up. Even mentioning Jacob's name, in front of me became something that people tended to seemingly avoid to do for fear that they would remind me, that I lost my son. And I can tell you, anybody who's lost a child or a spouse or someone they love deeply, you're not reminding them because they'll never forget. They're aware of that reality 24/7. And, when I was fortunate enough to find EricsHouse and speak to Greg the first time, I remember that he did exactly what you said. He didn't ask me how he died. He didn't ask me like interrogative type questions. He asked me to tell him about Jacob and his divine spark, what made him unique and what I missed about him. And I remember some of those things, but I could tell you in the moment, what lingers is how he made me feel. I felt like I had found a space where I could be where I was. I could say what I was feeling and I wasn't going to be judged. I wasn't going to be, kind of nudged along. Nobody would tell me not to feel that way, or I should feel this way instead. I was just allowed to be where I was. And that was so comforting and so helpful.
He was companioning you, not treating you. I always think of the words of Robert Bly, one of my mentors, through his writings earlier on in my career, where he said, your greatest gifts often come from your wounds. And we never go in search of those wounds. You know how I discovered the love I have to nurture my fellow humans in grief came also from my own personal losses. In my teen years, I had a series of losses. I wanted to be an architect. But an example of being transformed is that I totally shifted my even vocational hopes and dreams to want to be a grief care provider, because I saw our culture try to treat away pain instead of being present to pain. So that's a little reflection on my part about my why, I guess. I love what I get to do to help broken hearts each and every day of my life, children, teens, adults, and families. And I love to see the vision of EricsHouse and how they have done such a great job, particularly with stigmatized death. And the more stigma, the more pretense. I know what's happened. You know it. Let's not talk about it. You made passing comment about that. That with the kind of deaths that you beautifully outreach to through EricsHouse, you know how important it is, and just to say to somebody, well, if you need me, call me. Because the more stigma, the less support in general in our culture. So we have to be outreach oriented, let people know you have these groups available and individual companioning available. And so I think EricsHouse does a beautiful job of that. And I hope people continue to support the mission, because as I witnessed EricsHouse, as you experienced in your own personal journey, you were companioned, you weren't treated, and that, I don't want to speak for you, has made all the difference in where you are in your journey. Is that fair to say, that because
Absolutely
companioned you so beautifully, so lovingly, and you found other men who you could share your broken heart with, then there's glimmer of light. You know, you never wake up one day and done, because that's the North American resolution wish, where we think, okay, we'll just let time go by. The biggest cliche of all, time heals wounds. No, it doesn't. It's what you do with your wound. And if EricsHouse creates a place where I can authentically mourn, then I come out of dark to light and know that while I'm still forever changed, and Jacob's always part of you and who you are as his precious father, that you can even go on as you are now to helping companion others, which is another part of your experience. What's that been like? Can I ask you what it's been like to first receive from Greg and EricsHouse? And then I can just see how much you enjoy supporting other, particularly, I know, men. You've done some men's groups and things, but what can I ask you about that? I mean, I don't want to reverse roles with you again, but I just loved watching your evolution. When I first met you, you were brokenhearted. You've actively mourned authentically. You've gone on to reconcile in many ways. Again, you're never done, but you've made your life good again, and you love helping others. Is that not fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I do. You know, part of the experience of being companioned and being part of a support group with other men was that over time, you don't learn how to just receive companionship. You also learn how to extend your empathy to others. And I was really fortunate to be in a group with a bunch of men that were they were willing to go into that sadness, and they were willing to express it and have those conversations, those hard conversations in front of other people. And that's a difficult thing to do, especially for men. The way that our society is, and the expectations of the strong silent type, and you got to be strong for your family and keep yourself buttoned up. You're supposed to be a rock. And
I added to that for you, if I recall, were in the military, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's part of the warrior mentality. We just go forward and push on, work it through.
Right, and that's part of a survival technique whenever you're in the military. But when you come home, that doesn't always work, and that was definitely the case for me, where I had used the power through it approach to great effect in my life, but this was not something that I was going to be able to do.
And you were in part able to move from head to heart. I mean, not that you were already elements of your heart, but the function for our viewers is to remember the reason we retell the story is to make the unreal real.
Right.
When your precious child dies, that's unreal. So now to make it real, as hard as it is, that's why we call it the hard work of mourning, you get to come to that group, and they don't have to get in your way. They just need to help you retell the story, the love story with your precious son.
Right. And to be completely honest, I remain more connected to Jacob through this work than I would if I were doing anything else. In a lot of ways, he's with me now more than he was whenever he was on this earth, because he is impacting everything that I do. Every way that I show up in other people's lives are influenced by him, and the way he was in my life and what he means to me, continues to mean to me. And it is a beautiful thing to behold. It really is.
Yeah, and yeah, it's not anchored in pride, as you said. It's anchored in humility.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the more humble we stay, the more open we are to our fellow human beings when their hearts are broken.
We say in group all the time that you're going to change. You were changed the moment that you found out that your loved one was gone. That was non-negotiable. What is negotiable is how you change. You have some say in the direction that you take. And through an opportunity to authentically mourn, like I had in EricsHouse, I was able to find my true self, the person that I am today, and I'm so grateful for that.
The reason I wrote the book, You Have to Stay for the Cup of Coffee, is about 6 months prior to sitting down into my writing hut and writing it, I had a training person go through the foundational training, comprehensive bereavement skills training, come up on the last day, Thursday, and say, now, Alan, I have a new awareness. I never stay for the cup of coffee. And then he went on to have insight into the fact that he was kind of sympathetic to people, but he never stayed for the raw work of mourning. And so I thanked him for his insight, held the mirror up to him and said, now, what are you going to do about that? He says, I'm going to work hard to stay for the cup of coffee. And I thanked him for my next book title, which he gave me through that brief reflection that he said, I never stay for the cup of coffee. Well, obviously, metaphorically, we have to stay for the cup of coffee. We don't just say we're sorry and go away. There's a place to have sympathy that's more passive, but to really truly be helpful to each other when our hearts are broken, I think it demands active empathy. And by that, I mean respecting how somebody thinks, respecting how somebody feels. And then beyond that, if we're going to convert that into active caregiving, another element of empathy is a conscious decision of, am I going to stay around for that cup of coffee? Do I truly want to help? Because even if you know how somebody thinks and you respect that, even if you know how somebody feels and respect that, there comes a time of consciousness of saying, a third element of active empathy is, am I going to put that into place? Am I going to do something about it, not only individually, but in my community and even in a more global way, to say, gosh, we need to make changes in the world about having active empathy for each other when our hearts are broken.
And I think this is a great place to kind of wrap up for our audience here. But I'm wondering if there's something that you could say, or a piece of advice maybe that you could give to a friend who is currently sitting with a loved one that's struggling with grief, and they're trying to figure out how to help them. They feel a little helpless. They don't know what to do. What's one thing that they can do right now that can make them a better companion today?
Again, it may be simple, but I think there's profound understanding of how to help another person anchored in mouth closed, ears open, presence available. That if I had to give you one little jewel, I would say, keep your mouth closed. Once they know that you have the capacity to hold space for them, to have active empathy, to know they're your teacher. And so that's why we say mouth closed, because they should be the 80 and you're the 20. You're there only to facilitate holding up their love story backward before forward. Ears open, because you want to learn how to create deep listening. That's the problem. Too many people, when they get anxious, they want to talk too much. Mm-hmm. And then they move away from the 11 tenets of companioning, and they start unconsciously, whether they're a lay person or a professional caregiver, they start treating unknowingly. And presence available. And by that, I mean, have a compassionate presence. People will know if you're authentic and genuine and you're willing to stay present to their hurt and their pain and their suffering. So that may sound simple, but somebody once taught me that some of the most profound learnings are taking complex mysteries and making them understandable, if you will. So mouth closed, ears open, presence available, build knowledge, be grief informed, look at our 11 tenets that distinguish you from being a companion and a treater, and know that even if all of that, you'll still put your foot in your mouth, and then you'll humble yourself and apologize and go back to letting that person be your teacher. So thank you, Matthew. What a lovely conversation. Very enjoyable.
I am so grateful that you've taken the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with me and share a cup of coffee today. And this has been beautiful. I hope that our watchers were able to take away from this from the perspective of the mourner, maybe being able to find their voice when they may feel like they've not had that safe space, or that they've been encroached upon by somebody who loves them. It is well intended, but maybe has not as grief informed as they would, we would like them to be. And also for the supporter, the companion, for somebody who is not necessarily grief informed, to take some of the pressure off of them, to just know that showing up is the work, and it's not necessarily what you say or what you do, it's how you make them feel.
Beautiful. Well said.
So thank you so much again, Dr. Wolfelt. It's been a pleasure, and always an honor.
Thank you. Say hello to all my friends at EricsHouse. I appreciate the opportunity. Lovely.
Yes,
Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.